Good afternoon, ladies, gentlemen, respected lecturer, and fellow students. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this debate on emotion. Leaders are born, not made. This is a topic that has sparked discussion across generations, touching on the very nature of leadership and what makes someone truly capable of guiding others. As the chairman, it is my duty to ensure a fair and lively exchange of ideas. This evening, we will hear compelling arguments from both sides. The proposition will argue that leadership is a natural trait, something one is born with, while the opposition will seek to prove that leadership can be cultivated through experience, education, and effort. I ask the audience to listen with open minds, and I encourage our speakers to present their views with confidence, clarity, and respect for different opinions. So let us begin the debate, and we'd like to first hear from the leader of the ruling party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed judges, and my fellow colleagues and debaters. Today, we gather to explore the topic that has generated countless discussions and debates throughout history. Leaders are born, not made. Imagine a child no older than 7 years organizing a group of classmates, setting rules for a game, resolving conflicts, and commanding the attention of others without even raising their voice. Or consider a community activist who, without formal training, mobilizes a movement that changes the course of local policies. What do these individuals have in common? Did someone instruct them? No. They demonstrated innate leadership qualities that rise above skills learned. That, ladies and gentlemen, is natural leadership, and why we, the proposing team, firmly support the motion that leaders are born, not made. This statement, leaders are born, not made, invite us to consider the very ideas of leadership, that is, what it means to lead, who can lead, and how leadership qualities are developed. Let's begin with the great man theory that suggests that leaders are born with exceptional traits and rise to esteemed standings when their time comes. Think of Alexander the Great, who became king at 20 years old and never lost a battle. Or Joan of Arc, who at just 17 years led the French army to victory. These were not products of leadership seminars, they were born to lead. Adding to this, the trait theory of leadership, which identified characteristics such as charisma, confidence, decisiveness, emotional intelligence, and resilience as common in effective leaders. Studies, such as those by psychologist Ralph Stockdale, found that individuals who consistently take on leadership roles share their traits, many of which present from early childhood and strongly linked to genetic inheritance. Furthermore, scientific studies support our stance that leaders are indeed born. Studies, such as those conducted at the Minnesota study of twins reared apart, revealed that identical twins who shared nearly 100% of their genes exhibit remarkable similar leadership styles and tendencies, even when raised in different environments, proving that nature prevails over nurture in this context. Consider, consider the likes of Mahatma Gandhi and Nelson Mandela, who were not merely products of their environments. They possess innate qualities that empower them to motivate, inspire, and immobilize millions of people towards a vision. While training and experience may enhance responsibility, the core essence of a leader remains unchanged. Some individuals naturally inspire, influence, and guide others without needing formal leadership education. They possess a natural ability to command respect, make sound decisions, and guide and influence millions. Are these individuals simply outliners, or do they represent a wider truth that certain people have a predetermined destiny to lead? To conclude, as we engage in this debate, let us consider both sides. But then again, to challenge our assumptions and deep thinking of what it truly means to be a leader in our ever evolving world. Are we to believe that leadership is a skill that can be cultivated through hard work, mentorship, and willingness to learn? Leadership is about instinct, presence, and an innate ability to rise above challenges with unwavering confidence. These qualities are inherited, not acquired, proving that leaders are indeed born, not made. Thank you.
Thank you, leader of the ruling party, for your contribution. At this point, we'd like to take a 2-minute intermission, and we will proceed after. So at this point, we would like to hear from the Prime Minister.
Hi, good afternoon. Just a correction before I continue. It is the leader of the opposition. Okay, I'll start now. Pleasant good evening to the Honorable Speaker, esteemed members of the government, and distinguished members of the House. I am the leader of the opposition and I will be presenting the first arguments on behalf of my bench this evening, followed by the deputy leader of the opposition. Tonight, we, the opposition, stand boldly against the statement that leaders are born, not made. Let me begin with a simple question. Have you ever met someone who became a leader not because they inherited power or walked out of the womb giving TED Talks, but because they chose to rise? Think of a teacher who sparked change in a student's life, the community member who brought people together during a crisis, the student who went from overlooked to outstanding, not because it was written in their stars, but because they wrote it there themselves. Were they born leaders? Or did life carve leadership out of their experiences, their trials, and their choices? Let's be honest, if leadership were purely something you're born with, then why do so many people with privilege, status, and natural talents fail to inspire anyone? And why do so many quiet souls, overlooked by the world, rise to become the ones we follow? Government, respectfully, your motion doesn't just lack foundation, it lacks faith in people. Because what you're really saying is, unless you are lucky enough to be born with some magical leadership gene, don't bother trying. To that, we say nonsense. Leadership is not a birthright, it's not a bloodline, it's not some golden trait passed down like an antique ring. Leadership is a decision, a journey, a fire that you build, not something you're simply handed. You see, true leaders are forged in discomfort, pressure, and the quiet moments when no one is watching. They rise from privilege not from privilege, but from purpose. Take Mother Teresa. She wasn't born to lead the world. She chose to lead the forgotten. She made herself a vessel of service, not through birth, but through conviction. Barack Obama, born into challenge, not power, but through perseverance, he shaped himself into the kind of leader people believed in. He didn't wait for leadership to find him. He became the leader the world needed. Let's not forget the unnamed heroes, the single parent working two jobs while raising a family, the youth leader organizing change in their community, the friend who stands up for what's right, even when it's unpopular. They're not in the history books, but they lead every single day. As Maya Angelou once said, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Leadership, in its truest form, is about the impact you make, the way you inspire others, and the way you step up to guide them. It's not something you're born with, but something you choose every day. It's about how you connect with others, how you inspire others to rise, and how your actions motivate them to follow. That's what makes someone a true leader. Now let's turn this motion around. If leaders are only born, then what happens when the world calls for a new kind of leadership? One that requires resilience, adaptability, and the willingness to rise to the occasion. What happens when crisis strikes or when the status quo crumbles and those who are born into leadership are nowhere to be found? That's when it's the made leaders, the ones who stepped up, learned, and grew, who take charge and guide us through. Because real leadership isn't about being ready at birth. It's about being ready when it matters. So governments, while you sit comfortably in the arms of destiny, we're here fighting for those who climb their way into greatness. Not because they were chosen, but because they chose themselves. We don't just oppose this motion, we dismantle it. Because leadership is not in your bloodline, it's in your backbone. And it belongs to anyone brave enough to rise. Because leaders aren't born, they're built by experience, by struggle, and by heart. Thank you.
We thank you, Opposition Leader, for your contribution. At this moment, we'd like to take a 2-minute intermission and we will continue after. So we now like to call on the guardian of natural leadership and the first rebuttal for.
Good afternoon, everyone. Madam Chairperson, esteemed students. As the first rebuttal speaker for the proposition, I raise the challenge to the key arguments brought forward by the opposition while reinforcing the truth at the core of our motion that leaders are born, not made. The opposition side has told us that leadership is a decision that people rise from purpose, but let's unpack that.
While many people face responsibilities, not everyone leads. Why? Because leadership takes more than will. It takes natural vision, presence, and the ability to inspire. These qualities are not universally teachable, they are more often than not inborn. They mentioned Mother Teresa as a leader who chose to serve. But let's look deeper. From childhood, Mother Teresa displayed empathy, humility, and unusual level of compassion. All traits align with innate leadership. The founding of the Missionaries of Charity, wasn't the result of leadership training. It was driven by her inborn character. Her leadership evolved, yes, but it began with what she was born with. The opposition also referenced Barack Obama, but Obama's natural charisma, eloquence, and calm under pressure are exactly the kind of traits you can't manufacture. These are things people notice in someone long before they're in power. His leadership didn't begin with the White House. It began when he started captivating crowds as a student, as a speaker, and as a man with a presence. That's not made, that's natural charisma at work. They also claim that people become leaders through experience. And while experience can shape a leader, it cannot replace fundamental traits like vision, emotional intelligence, or courage. Many people receive training, but they never become effective leaders because they lack the core qualities that training can't provide. Let's not confuse management with leadership. Many are trained to manage systems, but few are naturally able to inspire movements. This is the critical difference. Historically, we've seen leaders like Gandhi, Churchill, Mandela rise in moments of great challenges, not because someone taught them how, but because they already had the clarity, resilience, and strength of the character they lead. They were not, they were the ones others turn to instinctively. This is natural leadership, not manufactured success. And the opposition's own examples, such as single parents stepping up, don't disprove our case. Rising to responsibility is admirable, but that doesn't automatically make someone a great leader. Responsibility doesn't equal leadership, and not everyone who faces challenges ends up rising. Others ends up inspiring others and leading change. Lastly, quoting Michelangelo, the opposition tried to show that greatness is made. But ironically, Michelangelo himself was known as a prodigy, a man whose genius emerged early, whose artistic gifts were inborn and only sharpened by experience, not created by it. The same goes for
Mr.
leadership.
Speaker, would the honorable member entertain a question?
So, sorry.
Yeah, proceed.
So you are saying if it's all in the genes, then why do so many born leaders make such terrible decisions? For example, we have adult Hitler, he fueled devastating wars. Joseph Stalin, his leadership led to famine and death of millions. Or Mr. Zedong, who caused countless individuals to starve. Do you have any sources to back that up for us?
One moment, please. Okay, sorry about that. So, could you repeat the question?
So the question says that if you are considering genes, why are so many quote unquote born leaders make such terrible decisions? And what are your sources to back it up?
Okay. So leadership is not about avoiding the mistakes. Many born leaders do make mistakes, but some examples of leaders who um some examples of leaders who were made mistakes were Jurgen Schrempf, the CEO who made poor decision in merging with Priscilla despite being highly trained and experienced. Steve Russell launched a misguided healthcare strategy that failed due to lack of preparation. But overall, thanks for the question. And making wrong decisions doesn't define someone, and that it doesn't mean that someone isn't a born leader. All leaders are born. And as you guys like to say, they are made. But take Winston Churchill, for example. He made several controversial wartime decisions, including Ga- Gallipoli campaign during the World War One, which was a major failure. Yet later he led Britain to victory in World War Two. Isn't that a good example?
I hear you, Ms. Speaker, but it still does not answer our question to prove your sources as to why genes are involved, because you are basically saying that when a baby is born, they are assigned leader at birth because of an unidentified gene. We have multiple sources to back up our information, such as a journal article which states that there is no gene conducted by multiple studies to prove what you are basically saying, as well as many leaders that I have named previously, such as Hitler, who basically disprove everything that you are saying right now, and they are not quote unquote born leaders.
Okay, so a landmark study published in Leadership Quarterly by Avery found that up to 30% of leadership traits are inherited. This was based on a study of over 4,000 babies, individuals, including twins who shared 100% of their DNA, showed much greater similarity in leadership potential than fraternal twins. So there is articles backing us up.
Honorable member, if I may interject into the argument going on here, the Minister of Development didn't ask about the persons you mentioned in your examples. She asked about specific people. Now, I understand that you have good examples about great leaders, yes, but what we want to know is what happened to these people. If they were born leaders, if they were born so perfect, how come they end up making these terrible decisions later on that cause millions to die or millions to suffer? That is what we wanted to know. We didn't ask for everything that you say, and you're just beating around the bush at this point.
The debate defender, would you like to respond to that question?
Yes, I would love to respond to that question. Just let me and my team organize.
We are
Okay,
kindly asking
so
that if someone would like to interject going forward, can they please raise their hand first to do so? Thank you.
okay, so okay, I do understand the question, and but as you said, born leaders do make a lot of mistakes, terrible mistakes at that. But you can't train someone endlessly, but if they lack resilience, charisma, or emotional intelligence, they won't recover from the failure the same way that they bounce back in an instant. That's inborn. So as even though they did make such terrible mistakes, they did come back from that after some time. Even the made leaders, as you guys like to say, many made terrible mistakes and never came back.
We have a question from someone from from the opposition.
Not a question, Mr. Speaker. Just a statement. You're saying that they come back from their mistakes. How did Adolf Hitler come back from his mistake? Now, clearly, you don't have a straightforward answer for our question. So we would like to proceed with the debate. But I want you to sit and think with that. How did Adolf Hitler came back from his mistake of killing millions of people? But thank you.
Before we move on, Mr. Speaker, sorry, Hitler, Hitler is a bad example because early in life showed Hitler wasn't seen as a natural leader in his youth. He struggled in school. He failed to get into art school and lived fairly.
We are asking the debate defender to please wrap up as in the essence of time.
Okay, at the end of my statement, well, at the end, adult Hitler is not a good example. But overall, leadership isn't about learning how to act like a leader. It's about being one at your core. Not everyone has the instinctive drive to lead, and that's why we say leaders are born, not made.
Thank you. At this point, we'd like to take a 2 minute intermission and we will continue after. At this point, we'd like to hear the first rebuttal against by the leader of the opposition.
Before we begin, thank you, Honorable Speaker. With all due respect to the government side, what we just heard was less of an argument and more of a motivational speech trying to pass us logic. And if that was supposed to be an argument, then I'm genuinely concerned. Because calling that an argument is like calling glitter a power tool. Real arguments are built on knowledge, structure, and facts, not on good vibes and blind optimism. What we just witnessed wasn't an argument, it was a performance, and not even a convincing one. Let me break this down. Leadership is a skill, not a genetic lottery. The government's case clings desperately to the outdated notion that leadership is something you're born with, like blue eyes or curly hair. But here's the truth: leadership is a learned and developable skill, not a prepackaged personality trait delivered at birth. The real debate here lies within the age old psychological discussion of nature versus nurture. And while nature may give you a head start, nurture is the one that finishes the race. According to James Zenger's research, published in the Harvard Business Review, the most effective leaders were not the ones with innate charisma, but those who had consistently developed skills like communication, strategic thinking, and empathy over time. So, unless the government can point us to this mystical leadership gene, which I should note does not exist according to geneticist Robert Pullman, this idea that leaders are only born is scientifically unsupported and intellectually lazy. We don't train leaders for fun. We do it because it works. If leaders were truly born, then why are billions invested every year into leadership developmental programs, seminars, courses, and mentorship initiatives around the globe? Is Harvard's Kennedy School just a very expensive birthday party for born leaders? Are the hundreds of thousands of leadership certificates offered by institutions like MIT Sloan or Coursera all for sure? Of course not. These programs exist because we know leadership can be taught. In fact, according to McKinsey and Company, leadership development is a top priority for 89% of organizations, with measurable improvements in performance, innovation, and engagement as a result. If leadership couldn't be taught, we wouldn't bother, but we do, and it works. History doesn't lie. Leaders are made through trials. Let's take a quick history lesson, shall we? Was Mahatma Gandhi born with a protest sign in his hand? Did Oprah Winfrey arrive into this world with a talk show mic and a billion-dollar empire? Was Nelson Mandela casually handed leadership after 27 years in prison because he was just born different? No, these weren't bedtime stories. These were people who rose from hardship, who earned their place through pain, perseverance, and purpose. They weren't born leaders, they became them. So when the government side suggests that leadership is just an innate trait, something you either have or you don't, they're not only being dismissive, they're being historically illiterate. And that's not an argument, that's an erasure of human journey. Because if greatness were just natural, then why bother educating, mentoring, or investing in people at all? Why not just sit around and wait for the next chosen one to show up? This isn't mythology, this is real life. And in real life, leaders are made, not manufactured in some elite factory of fates. So while the government swims in fantasy, we're still grounded in the truth. And frankly, that's the difference between sounding impressive and being right. So let's be real here. If the government's case was a resume, it would read no experience, high confidence. But confidence alone doesn't lead nations, spark movements, or change the world. Competence does, growth does, effort does. To say leaders are only born is to look at the world's greatest change makers and reduce them to nothing more than lucky genetics. That's not just inaccurate, it's insulting. So let me leave you with this. The government believes leadership is a destiny. We believe leadership is a decision. And while they're busy searching for the chosen few, we're building leaders every single day. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution. At this point, we'd like to take a 2 minute intermission and we would continue after. Before we continue, we'd like to remind the House that the second rebuttal and conclusion that new main points um, cannot be given at this point. So now we'd like to call on the debate defender for the second rebuttal for.
Good day, Mr. Speaker. So the opposition claims that leadership is a skill that can be learned. And they've also pointed out leadership programs as evidence that anyone can be trained to be a leader. So they argue that leadership is not only passionately born with, but leadership is probably a result of environment, hardship, and consistent skill development. So while we applaud their efforts, their claims overlook the powerful truth that, backed up by both science and real work experience, these leaders not only born, they are made. So as the first speaker for would have introduced with genetics, studies published in the Leadership Quarterly show and genetics account for up to 30% of leadership ability. This means that some people are naturally wired to lead because the traits like confidence, charisma, and resilience traits that can be taught. Even before formal training, some children stand out as leaders in school, sports, and life. Why? Because of what they were born with, not with what they were taught. So they also mentioned that Gandhi, Mandela, and others who rose from difficult backgrounds. But the truth is, millions of people face hardship, yet only a few emerge as leaders. Think about it, hardship is common, natural leadership is rare. That's what sets these individuals apart. So they had the inborn strength, emotional intelligence, and vision that allowed them to rise when others didn't. So yes, we spend billions on leadership training, but if leadership could be made, then everyone who goes through these programs would become a great leader. But they don't. Training helps polish skills, so but it can manufacture passion, presence, or purpose, just like you can teach someone to sing, but not everyone becomes Whitney Houston. Naturally, ability matters. You can teach management, but real leaders is about character, and that's built long before any formal training. So what we do should take into
Excuse, we
consideration.
have a question. Would you take a question now? Um, Debate defender, would you accept a question now?
Ah, yes.
Okay, proceed.
Hi. So, Honorable Member, you mentioned in the beginning of your argument that born leaders are wired in a certain way that made them become leaders. Wired. I I've been doing biology for many years and I've never heard the term wired when we talk about genetics or DNA. So firstly, would you like to point me to the gene that made them wired to be leaders? Also, from my research, genetic influence only accounted for 30% of that may be inherited to leaders. However, 70% are taught and developed through the years of growth. So, can you lead me to this gene that wired them the way they are to become leaders?
Good day. Can you just give me a minute, please?
No problem.
Sure. We like to remind the debate defender that the time they're taken to respond is also taken out of their time.
My apologies. So, continuing from the question that was asked about the gene and stuff. So, a groundbreaking study conducted by researchers at the University College London in 2013 found that genetic factors account for about 30%, which I would have said before. So there is a study, researchers even identified a specific gene, the RS4950, that is directly linked to natural leadership ability. So this isn't just about holding leadership positions. It's about possessing natural traits like charisma, confidence, emotional control, and quick decision making, all of which are heavily influenced by genetics. In fact, traits like extraversion and risk tolerance, which is crucial for effective leadership, have heritability rates as well as 40 to 60%. Identical twin studies also support this. So twins with identical genetic makeups often end up with similar leadership tendencies, even when raised in completely different environments. Now consider history. Great leaders like Alexander and great Martin Luther King, which would have been introduced by my previous speaker, they demonstrated exceptional leadership from a young age, driven by an internal force that can be manufactured. So yes, skills can be improved, but the spark, the presence, and the natural ability to inspire and lead others, that's something you have to have or you don't. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does, Honorable Speaker. However, I'm just saying a natural born leader would have already won this argument. Thank you.
We thank you, the debate defender, for your contribution. We'd like to remind the House to be respectful at all times. And at this point, we'd like to take a 2-minute intermission and we will continue after. At this point, we'd like to have the second rebuttal against, and we call on the deputy leader of the opposition.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Before I begin, allow me to extend a respectful good night to you, to the members of government, and to every member of this House. As the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, it is an honor to rise and contribute to tonight's debate. What we just heard from the government side was passionate, yes, but passion alone doesn't make a strong argument. While their speech may have been inspiring, it lacked the critical elements of a solid case: evidence, structure, and clear reasoning. If we take a step back, we can see that their points were built more on emotion than on logic. There was no real foundation, just broad statements and idealistic thinking. Now let's revisit what the leader of the opposition already established.
We have a hand from one of the members. Would you take it?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I accept.
Okay, sorry to cut you, but overall, after everything that you said, that your members have said throughout the debate so thus far, can you truly name an iconic leader who didn't already show signs of leadership in early life?
One leader that comes to mind is Malala. Now, Malala didn't inherit power, but she did inherit danger. She was born into a very dangerous situation. However, through her courage and education, she became a global leader. She even published a book and went on a world tour, encouraging young girls all over the world to get an education. Does that answer your question?
For now, thank you.
Okay. As I was saying, our argument isn't based on what should work in theory, but on what actually does work in practice. So let's bring the discussion back to that: logic, reason, and reality. The belief that leaders are simply born, not made, is an outdated idea that doesn't hold up in today's world. Leadership isn't something you're born with like eye color or height. It's a skill, one that develops over time through experience, learning, and reflection. No one enters the world knowing how to guide others, make complex decisions, or navigate real world challenges. Those are things we gain through practice, not something we inherit. Even neuroscience backs this up. The concept of
Excuse
brain.
me, sir. Excuse speaker. There's someone with their hand up. Someone from the opposition, from the party, from the member of parliament. Do you have a question? Apparently not. Please continue.
Thank you. Even neuroscience backs up the point we're trying to make. The concept of brain plasticity, the brain's ability to grow and adapt, shows that we are constantly learning and evolving. Skills like conflict resolution, communication, and strategic thinking aren't innate traits, they are built through effort and experience. So rather than seeing leadership as a fixed trait, we should understand it as a continuous process of development. Let's apply the government's logic to the real world. If leaders are just born, why bother teaching anyone anything? Why are there entire industries built around leadership training? What are universities, corporate workshops, military academies, and community mentoring programs doing? Are they just wasting time? Are they burning money for fun? Of course not. We don't run leadership training programs because we are bored. We do it because it works, because people can be taught to lead, and we see it year after year across every sector. If leadership was some magical gene, then Harvard, McKinsey, and the military would all be running massive multi-million-dollar science fiction fan clubs. But they are not. They are building leaders, one course, one challenge, and one failure at a time. Let's turn to history. Was Rosa Parks born to spark a revolution? No, she was tired, tired of injustice and the moment. That choice turned her into a leader. Did Abraham Lincoln rise because he was born with a presidential posture? No, he lost more elections than most people apply for jobs. And yet he learned, he adapted, and he rose. That's leadership, not prophecy. If the government's theory held water, then history would just be a family tree of lucky DNA. But it's not. It's a record of people who rose in spite of their circumstances, not because of them. What we've shown tonight is that leadership is not a birthright, it is a journey. It's not reserved for the chosen few, but available to anyone willing to learn, grow, and rise to the challenge. The government's position relies on an outdated, elitist notion that denies the power of perseverance, education, and experience. But we know better. We've seen it in classrooms, in communities, in history. Leadership is built, not born. So let's reject the myth of innate destiny and instead champion a future where every person has the potential to lead. Thank you.
We thank you for your contribution, Deputy Leader of the Opposition. At this point, we'd like to take a 2 minute intermission and then we'll continue. At this point, we call on the debate defender to give the conclusion for.
Good night, Mr. Speaker. So the opposition claims that Nelson Mandela was the made leader, but let's not rewrite history. Mandela demonstrated visions, bravery, and leadership long before he was ever trained or officially recognized. Even in his youth, he stood out, speaking out against injustice, organizing student protests, and earning respect among peers. President didn't make Mandela a leader. It simply revealed and refined what was already there. Unshakable conviction, natural influence, and the ability to unite even in silence. You don't spend 27 years in prison and emerge more respected than ever unless you were already born with something extraordinary. That's not made, that's innate. So, moving on. Leadership is not something you install, it's something you ignite. So, while skills can be sharpened and experience can shape the journey, they can't create what isn't already there. You can teach someone to speak, but not inspire. You can show someone the way, but not give them the instinct to lead others through it. From Mandela to Mother Teresa, Obama to Churchill, they weren't built in a workshop. They were born with a spark. And that spark, that leadership. So we stand firmly that this side of the motion, leaders are not born manufactured. Leaders are not manufactured, they are born. Wired by nature, refined by life, and followed by many. Thank you all.
Thank you for your contribution. We take a brief intermission and then we would conclude after.
Up on everything, okay? Yeah. I'm a debate. So they can sit down now.
Vice President, I think your mic is on. We now like to have the conclusion against, and so we call on the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to address us.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we bring this debate to a close, it's important to return to the facts, the logic, and the reality that has grounded our case from the very start. If the government's theory were a tech product, it would still be in beta, buggy, glitchy, and completely untested in reality. It might have a sleek pitch, but it crashes the moment it's applied to the real world because confidence isn't leadership. Popularity isn't leadership, and being loved at birth isn't a sign of greatness, it just means that your lungs work. True leadership doesn't come from pre installed. It's developed slowly, painfully, and with intention. In the heat of pressure, the chill of failure, and the grind of experience. Leaders are not sculpted by genetics, but by choices. They emerge not because they are born with the crown, but because they learn how to carry the weight of responsibility. So while the government lounges on the chassis of destiny, waiting for born leaders to magically emerge from the shadows like some sort of chosen ones, we'll be where it matters, in the trenches. We'll be building leaders, coaching them, challenging them, watching them fail, get back up and grow. Because that's what leadership actually looks like. It's messy, human, and earned. Leadership isn't found in cribs. It's found in classrooms, in boardrooms, on the front lines of crisis, in late night study sessions, on community organizing calls, and in quiet moments of tough decisions. It's found where people are willing to rise, not because they were told they were special, but because they decided to act. So, no, we don't just oppose this motion, we reject it outright. We toss it into the recycling bin of tired, simplistic ideas that don't stand up to scrutiny or reality because leadership isn't an inheritance. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution. Well, after that debate, I think we can all agree on one thing. Whether leaders are born or made, they can definitely argue good points. Thank you to both sides for your strong arguments and to our audience for staying alert, even though we were not provided with snacks. So now we will take some few minutes to judge and decide who led the debate best. Thank you.